I am resilient, I am deadly, I am strong, I'm healthy, I'm culturally inspired, I'm happy, I'm dedicated, I'm caring, I'm extremely proud to be Indigenous. And like every woman I meet, I'm so inspired by them. People on ONWA, like every time I go to an ONWA meeting, like at first I used to be super shy, like I wouldn't talk. And like I was like, oh my God, like I don't know what to do. And then like now that I'm going to the meetings and like even going to the AGAs, I'm like, oh my God, I just feel like, oh, I'm a part of this deadly organization that are helping other Indigenous women to find their voice, speaking up and talking about important issues that all of us could relate. Like it brings, like it's like in a community or like as a family, like we grow, we bond, we share, we laugh, we cry. Like as Indigenous people too, that's important because that's who we are, and like no one else might not understand it, but that's okay because that's us as people.
I think with my own leadership, one of the biggest traits that I try to embody is that support. So again, just going back to all of the support that I received when I was growing up and how important that was to me. And I try to provide that in my life to other Indigenous youth through my work, where I know that not all Indigenous youth have the privilege of having strong role models and have all of these challenges that they might be facing and all of these questions that they face in their life. And really just being that person in their life that they know that they can turn to, or that just understands their identity and understands some of the challenges that they're facing that not everybody understands. And I think that's one of the biggest characteristics of my leadership, is that I want to support the leadership of others. And realistically, making change in this world doesn't come from one person, that we need to support each other and we need to uplift each other's voices. And that's how we're going to make change. That's how we're going to make a difference and see a better future for everybody.
I work in law, which is a kind of very rigid space full of rules and protocols and expectations for how, lawyers should act and how law should be practiced. And so I really try to do things differently and in a way that feels, inherently right for me. And so in my work, I really try to humanize the practice of law, and really honor the stories of those who I'm working with, and do everything that I can to make their stories known and recognized, and try to achieve justice for them at the end of the day.
My journey to leadership really started probably before I was even born. My mom and my grandma have always been big Indigenous women's rights advocates. By the time I was born, my mom was part of ONWA, so I have always kind of been part of this leadership and really had the opportunity to grow up and see these strong Indigenous women leaders and really understand what that meant and why it was so important from the time I was just crawling around the meeting room, going to these events. There's actually a really funny picture of my sister like peeking out from under one of the tables at a meeting. And I was really lucky to always have that support and those role models in my life to kind of guide me and help me in my journey. My family has also always been very heavily involved in education, specifically Indigenous education. So that's, again, always just been a part of my life and a part of who I am as a person, and really understanding the importance of understanding who we are as Indigenous peoples and doing things in a culturally relevant way to ensure that our youth grow up and understand who they are and how they can use those strengths to help themselves succeed in their lives in whatever way that may be, because success looks different for everybody.
When I was a young teenager, I, vividly recall going to a march for Indigenous women's safety on the streets of Winnipeg, and seeing a little girl there also attending the march, holding up a sign that said, "Will I be next?" in reference to the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit in Canada. And I knew then, just in that moment and in that space of the march, with Indigenous women from across the city and their children, knowing that I wanted to try to devote my life to creating a safer and healthier country for Indigenous women and girls, where every Indigenous girl can dream of their future rather than for a future. And so I decided that the best way that I thought I could kind of embark on this journey and this dream of mine was to become an advocate and a lawyer. And so I now have the very great privilege of representing Indigenous women, Indigenous-led organizations, and Indigenous nations in their claims against Canada. And so this is included on safe drinking water on reserve, as well as safe housing on reserve.
As Indigenous people, we're all leaders in our own ways. Others by speaking out on Indigenous issues, and we all face the same issues like intergenerational trauma, cultural rights, schooling. I always believed in practicing our inherent rights as Indigenous people, have a right to speak up and voice out our opinions on important matters in our communities and our lands. When I first attended my first meeting at ONWA, I was the only youth member there, but I was super amazed of how all the women there, they were all really focused and really, they believed in what they talked about. So I was like, oh, I must be like that when I talk about certain things. So I know deep down in my own ways, I'm a leader for my community and my friends.
Yeah, so I'm the first generation in my family to go to university. And one of the biggest challenges that I faced was kind of navigating post-secondary education on my own. And I never really knew if I could actually do it. So if I could actually pass my first year classes, if I could get the grades I needed to be admitted to law school, and if I could achieve, the score that I needed on the law school admission test that I needed to get. And so there were lots of kind of stumbling blocks along the way, where I really doubted that I could get to the place I always dreamed of being. I always dreamed of, representing our people and elevating Indigenous people's voices in spaces where we're all too often forgotten. But I knew as I was going, and no matter how kind of hard or difficult the obstacle was in front of me, that I had to keep trying even when things didn't work out as I had hoped or as I had really worked for and wanted to work out. To keep pushing and keep moving ahead, and kind of do everything that I could to achieve my dream of becoming a lawyer.
Growing up, the other girls were shy. So I thought it was oh, okay, you have to be shy because everyone else was shy. But then I was so tired of being shy, so I was you know what, this has to stop. I'm just gonna do what I want to do because I'm not gonna go anywhere, or I'm not gonna have good opportunities come my way. So I started to become outgoing. I would just speak my mind. I would just go for the opportunity when I could.
As a youth, I think one of the biggest challenges I've faced, especially in the education system, is going to school. And I'm sure we've all had those experiences where we're in public school and you have your classmates say some not so nice things and you don't really know how to navigate that. Another thing is just, again, having to be the person in the room that has that experience and has to speak from that experience and say, hey, this is really great, but from the perspective of an Indigenous woman, these are the issues, and we have to approach this from a trauma-informed lens so that we're learning and we're moving forward in a good way, and we're not creating more harm with what could be good intentions, but if you don't really understand and you don't have that experience, unknowingly may cause harm. part of what helped me overcome those challenges was having that strong support system in my life through, I had some really good Indigenous teachers in high school that I was able to go to and say like, hey, how do we address these things? What are your thoughts? Like, this is some problems that I'm facing. And I had these Indigenous women leaders through ONWA, through just my family members that were really, really important, just to kind of reinforce that despite the fact that you may feel those things out in greater society, that you're not good enough, there's something wrong. Having those strong role models there to really help and empower and support, and having that constant reassurance of who you are as an Indigenous woman and your strength in that really helped me to be able to navigate those situations. And again, going forward, I'm able to share my experiences with my sisters and other youth to help them navigate through what they're experiencing and be able to be that support system for others.
My vision for change is growing up in a small community, northern community. You can see all forms of the intergenerational trauma. Growing up in the lateral violence and like the lack of coping skills, the lack of services, and the lack of support to better each other. And there was a lack of like culture in my community. Ever since I was young, I was always interested in my culture. So like I used to get books from like the school library and be like, oh, I know I'm Native, I know I'm this, I know I'm that. And then like I'd be like, you know you're Native? Like to my friends back in school, and they're like, what? Like what is like? Because they didn't have no self-identity. So I would try to teach them as much as I can. Like, yeah, you know, we're Cree. Some of you guys are Uji Cree or just Ojibwe. So like, I was always interested in that. I love other Indigenous women hunting. Like, there's a lack of women hunters in my area, but I get so excited when I'm like, yeah, I want to go get my FAC, and I'm like, do it, we'll go hunting. And I'm like, oh, let's go fishing. I'm like, I'll take you fishing, just come. So like, I always thought of creating like a woman's hunting group in my area to like, and share my knowledge with the other women. And like, I share my knowledge with my sisters, my friends, and even my nieces. So it's a start. It's one step, but it's going somewhere. I feel it.
So my vision for change is to build a country where Indigenous women and girls are able to live freely and fully, and where we can all reach our individual and collective potential.
I would give them the advice of to never give up, no matter what challenges you might face, no matter what obstacles might be in your path, that there's always a way around it. My grandma is a very good storyteller, and she has this story of when she was a little girl and there was this apple in the tree that her auntie had wanted to take to the fall fair. And her auntie said, like, nobody can pick that apple, like nothing can happen to this apple because that was her prize winning apple. And my grandma tells the story of how when she was a little girl, she really, really wanted this apple. And she thought that nobody can pick this apple. Okay. So she got a little stool and she went up and she bit all the way around the apple because she still really wanted that apple. And she was still following the rules of not picking the apple. And that's just kind of like her funny little anecdote about how there's always a way around the obstacles that might be in your path, and to never really give up, because as Indigenous women, like, if all of the women that came before us gave up at some point on their journey, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Not to let anything get in your way, especially as Indigenous women. There's obstacles and there's challenges, but we're First Nation people. We're strong, we're independent, we're resilient.
You know, you can do it. You are a remarkable, unique, and sacred part of creation. Believe in yourself and believe in your dreams. And I would tell them, your ancestors walk with you. Your entire community is behind you, supporting you and cheering you on. You can do it and believe in yourself.